I've been working on Japanese taxi fleets for 12 years, and in 2018 I visited Tokyo to understand something that didn't make sense. The oldest commercial taxis still running anywhere in the world are all in Tokyo. Not some of them, all of them. Same cars that died in New York at 300,000 miles are still carrying passengers in Tokyo at over a million. Same engine, same transmission. The only difference is how they're maintained. I met with a mechanic named Takeshi at a Crown Comfort taxi depot in Shibuya. He walked me through their maintenance log, every single service documented down to the minute, and when I showed him what American taxi companies do, he looked genuinely confused. You wait that long between services, how do the cars survive? That question changed everything I thought I knew about durability. The average taxi in America is retired around 350,000 miles. In Tokyo, retirement starts at 750,000 and goes well past a million. Same vehicle platform, different system. And when I get to number 8, you're going to understand why Tokyo taxi engines look almost new inside even after 500,000 miles of stop-and-go traffic. Subscribe now, because what I'm about to show you applies to any Toyota or Nissan sitting in your driveway right now. American taxi companies maintain vehicles to meet minimum operational standards. Japanese taxi operators maintain vehicles to preserve component condition. It's not about keeping the car running, it's about keeping every part in near-perfect state so nothing ever reaches the failure point. The goal is to never need a major repair, not because repairs are expensive, because downtime costs more than prevention ever will. In America, we think about oil changes. In Japan, they think about oil condition. The interval isn't based on mileage or months, it's based on operating hours and engine load. Tokyo taxi operators change oil every 3,000 kilometers. That's about 1,850 miles. Not because the oil is completely degraded at that point, because they want to remove contamination before it has any chance to affect bearing surfaces. Here's what actually happens inside an engine between oil changes. For the first 1,000 miles, the oil is doing exactly what it should: lubricating, cooling, cleaning, but metal wear particles start accumulating immediately. The detergent additives that suspend those particles begin breaking down. By 3,000 miles, even premium synthetic oil has measurable contamination. By 5,000 miles, that contamination starts scoring cylinder walls, microscopic damage. You won't see it on a compression test, but over 200,000 miles, it adds up to measurable wear. I tore down a Crown Comfort taxi engine in Tokyo with 680,000 miles on it. The owner had followed the 1,850-mile oil change interval religiously. The cylinder walls still had visible cross-hatching. The bearings looked like they had 50,000 miles on them. I've torn down American taxi engines at 200,000 miles that had sludge deposits on the valve covers and measurable scoring on the crank journals. Same engine family. Different oil strategy. An oil change in Tokyo costs about 4,000 yen. That's roughly $30 USD. At 1,850-mile intervals over 500,000 miles, that's about 270 oil changes. Total cost around $8,000. An engine replacement costs $15,000 plus a week of downtime. The math isn't complicated, but American fleet operators look at the immediate cost per service, not the total cost of ownership. Japanese operators calculate differently. You won't hear this interval from any dealership in America because the service department profit model depends on longer intervals and more frequent repairs. Oil changes are low margin. Engine work is high margin. Recommending short intervals would cut into the repair revenue that keeps service departments profitable. That's not conspiracy. That's just how the business is structured. Your interest and their interest are not aligned. Transmission fluid in Tokyo taxis gets changed every 20,000 kilometers. That's roughly every 12,400 miles. In America, most taxi companies run transmission fluid to 50,000 miles or longer. Some follow the so-called lifetime fluid guidance. In Tokyo, there is no such thing as lifetime fluid. Every fluid is a wear item with a specific service life. Automatic transmission fluid operates under extreme pressure and temperature. It doesn't just lubricate gears. It actuates clutch packs, controls shift timing, and manages torque converter lockup. As the fluid ages, it loses viscosity. The friction modifiers that ensure smooth shifts degrade. Metal particles from normal clutch wear accumulate in the fluid. By 50,000 miles, that fluid is no longer performing the way it did when new. I inspected a transmission from a Tokyo Crown Comfort with 720,000 miles. The owner changed the fluid every 12,400 miles using only genuine Toyota Type T IV fluid. I pulled the pan. The clutch packs had minimal wear. The valve body was clean. Shift feel was identical to a transmission with 30,000 miles. I've rebuilt American taxi transmissions at 180,000 miles where the clutch material had carbonized and the valve body passages were partially blocked with debris. Transmission fluid change in Tokyo costs about 8,000 yen, roughly $60. Over 500,000 miles at 12,400 mile intervals, that's about 40 services. Total cost around $2,400. A transmission replacement costs $6,500 plus 3 days of lost revenue. Japanese taxi operators see the fluid change as insurance. American operators see it as optional until the transmission starts slipping. By then, it's too late. No American service advisor will recommend this interval because it sounds excessive to customers who have been told fluid is lifetime. It's easier to sell what people expect than to explain why their expectation is wrong. Tokyo mechanics don't have to convince anyone. The maintenance standard is industry-wide. Every taxi follows it. The results speak clearly enough that no one questions the approach. Coolant in Tokyo taxis gets replaced every 40,000 kilometers. That's about every 24,850 miles. Most American taxi companies run coolant until it turns brown or the system starts overheating. Toyota's official guidance says 100,000 miles for long-life coolant. In Tokyo, they ignore that completely. Coolant doesn't just prevent freezing and boiling. It contains corrosion inhibitors that protect aluminum cylinder heads, iron blocks, and copper heater cores from galvanic corrosion. Those inhibitors break down over time. Once they're depleted, the cooling system starts corroding from the inside. You won't see it until a head gasket starts weeping or a heater core develops a pinhole leak. By then, the damage is systemic. At 24,850-mile intervals, coolant still looks new. The pH is stable. The inhibitor concentration is still effective. There's no visible contamination. Japanese mechanics change it anyway because they're preventing corrosion that won't show symptoms for another 100,000 miles. I've pressure-tested cooling systems on Tokyo taxis with 650,000 miles. No leaks, no scaling, radiator cores still flowing at full capacity. The system performs like it's new because it's never been allowed to degrade. An American taxi I inspected at 220,000 miles had brown coolant and visible corrosion on the radiator end tanks. The owner had never changed it. He followed the 100,000-mile guidance and figured he still had time. The head gasket failed at 235,000 miles. Repair cost was $2,800 plus a week off the road. A coolant flush costs $45. He could have done it 10 times for less than half the cost of one head gasket job. A coolant replacement in Tokyo costs about 5,000 yen, roughly $38. Over 500,000 miles at 24,850-mile intervals, that's about 20 services. Total cost around $760. It prevents head gasket failures, radiator replacements, water pump failures caused by contaminated coolant, and heater core leaks. Every mechanic in Japan knows this. Almost no one in America follows it because the official guidance says it's unnecessary. If you want a complete Tokyo taxi maintenance schedule broken down by exact mileage intervals with fluid specifications and part numbers for your specific Toyota or Nissan model, I've put together a detailed guide that covers every service from oil changes to differential fluid. It's organized by odometer reading so you know exactly what to do and when. Link is in the description. Air filter replacement in Tokyo happens every 10,000 kilometers. That's every 6,200 miles. In America, the standard recommendation is 15,000 to 30,000 miles depending on driving conditions. Tokyo is one of the cleanest cities in the world. They still change the filter every 6,200 miles without exception. A clogged air filter doesn't just reduce power, it changes the air-fuel ratio. The engine computer compensates by adding more fuel to maintain performance. That means you're burning more gas and creating more carbon deposits on intake valves and piston tops. Over time, those deposits reduce combustion efficiency and increase the risk of pre-ignition knock. It's gradual. You won't notice it week to week. But over 100,000 miles, the fuel economy difference is measurable. I tested airflow on a Tokyo taxi air filter at 6,200 miles. It still looked relatively clean, but airflow was down about 12% compared to a new filter. At 15,000 miles, airflow restriction would be closer to 30%. Japanese mechanics don't wait for the filter to look dirty. They change it based on the measurable impact on engine breathing. I compared fuel economy logs from two identical Crown Comfort taxis. One followed the Tokyo 6,200-mile air filter interval. The other followed a 20,000-mile interval. Over 300,000 miles, the Tokyo Standard taxi averaged 0.4 kilometers per liter better fuel economy. That's about 1 mile per gallon. Doesn't sound like much. But over 300,000 miles in a taxi running 10 hours a day, that's about 1,200 gallons of fuel saved. At $4 a gallon, that's $4,800. An air filter costs $12. Service advisors in America recommend longer intervals because customers complain about frequency. It's easier to sell a 30,000-mile interval than to explain why 6,200 miles is better. Tokyo taxi operators don't debate it. The filter gets changed on schedule. Fuel economy stays consistent. carbon buildup stays minimal. The cost-benefit is documented across millions of miles of fleet data. Spark plugs in Tokyo taxis are replaced every 40,000 kilometers, about every 24,850 miles. American guidance for iridium plugs is typically 100,000 miles. Some manufacturers say 120,000 miles. In Tokyo, they replace them at a quarter of that interval regardless of what the plug looks like. Spark plugs don't fail suddenly in most cases. They degrade gradually. The electrode gap increases as the iridium wears. The insulator nose accumulates carbon deposits. Combustion efficiency drops incrementally. The engine still runs, it just doesn't run as cleanly. Fuel economy decreases, throttle response dulls, emissions increase. You adapt to the gradual decline and don't notice it until you replace the plugs and feel how the engine used to perform. At 24,850 miles, an iridium plug is nowhere near failure, but the electrode gap has widened slightly. There's light carbon accumulation. The spark is measurably weaker than it was when new. Japanese mechanics replace the plugs before that degradation affects combustion quality. I've pulled plugs from Tokyo taxis at the 24,850 mile mark. They could easily run another 50,000 miles. But they don't because the goal isn't to run parts to failure, it's to maintain peak performance continuously. I dynoed two identical taxi engines, one with plugs at 24,850 miles, one with new plugs. The engine with new plugs made 4% more horsepower and 6% better fuel economy under the same load conditions. Over 200,000 miles, that efficiency difference adds up to thousands of dollars in fuel costs. A set of iridium plugs costs $60. Over 500,000 miles at 24,850 mile intervals, that's about 20 plug changes. Total cost $1,200. The fuel savings alone pay for the service twice over. Dealerships recommend the 100,000-mile interval because it sounds reasonable and customers accept it without pushback. Shorter intervals require explaining why the manufacturer recommendation isn't optimal. Most service writers won't have that conversation. Tokyo mechanics don't need to explain. The standard is the standard. Results are documented. No one questions it. Brake fluid in Tokyo taxis is replaced every year. Not every 30,000 miles. Not every 50,000 miles. Every single year regardless of mileage. Most American taxi operators change brake fluid only when the brakes are serviced for pad replacement or when the fluid turns visibly dark. Some never change it at all. Brake fluid is hygroscopic. It absorbs moisture from the air through microscopic pores in rubber hoses and around reservoir caps. As water content increases, the boiling point of the fluid drops. When you're driving a taxi in stop-and-go traffic for 10 hours a day, brake temperatures get high enough that water-contaminated fluid can boil. When brake fluid boils, it creates vapor pockets. Vapor compresses. Hydraulic fluid does not. That's why you get a spongy brake pedal or complete pedal fade under heavy braking. At 1 year old, brake fluid in a Tokyo taxi typically has less than 2% water content. At 3 years old, water content can exceed 4%. The boiling point drops from 450 degrees Fahrenheit to under 300 degrees. I've tested brake fluid from American taxis that had never been changed. Some had over 6% water content. The fluid was dark brown. The boiling point was dangerously low. One hard stop from highway speed could cause complete brake fade. I tested a Tokyo taxi with 580,000 miles that had fresh brake fluid changed every year. The pedal feel was firm. Brake response was immediate. I compared it to an American taxi at 190,000 miles that had never had the fluid changed. The pedal felt soft. There was noticeable travel before the brakes engaged. Both cars had similar brake pad wear. The only difference was fluid condition. Brake fluid flush in Tokyo costs about 6,000 yen, roughly $46. Do that every year for 10 years and you've spent $460. A complete brake system failure that causes an accident or requires replacing calipers and lines corroded by moisture-contaminated fluid costs thousands. Japanese taxi operators see brake fluid service as non-negotiable safety maintenance. American operators see it as optional until something goes wrong. You won't hear annual brake fluid changes recommended at American service centers because it sounds excessive and most customers will decline. It's easier to recommend it only when the fluid looks bad. By then, internal corrosion has already started. Tokyo doesn't wait for visible symptoms. They service based on time because they know moisture absorption happens whether you see it or not. Differential fluid in rear-wheel drive Tokyo taxis gets changed every 40,000 kilometers. That's every 24,850 miles. Most American service schedules don't even list differential fluid as a maintenance item. It's considered lifetime unless you're towing or driving in severe conditions. Tokyo taxis are classified as severe service by default. The fluid gets changed like clockwork. Differential fluid operates under extreme pressure. Hypoid gear sets generate sliding contact that creates heat and shear forces that break down the lubricant. The extreme pressure additives that prevent metal-to-metal contact degrade over time. Once those additives are depleted, gear wear accelerates. You won't hear noise or feel vibration until the damage is already significant. I drained differential fluid from a Tokyo Crown Comfort at the 24,850-mile interval. The fluid still looked relatively clean, no metal particles visible to the naked eye, but laboratory analysis showed the additive package was down to 68% effectiveness. At 50,000 miles, effectiveness would drop below 50%. That's when wear starts. Japanese mechanics change it before that threshold. I rebuilt a differential from an American taxi at 240,000 miles. The fluid had never been changed. The ring and pinion gears had visible pitting. The carrier bearings were worn enough that there was measurable backlash. The fluid was black and smelled burnt. Repair cost was $2,200. A differential fluid change cost $70. Over 500,000 miles at 24,850-mile intervals, that's about 20 services. Total cost $1,400. It prevents a failure that costs more than all those services combined. American service departments don't mention differential fluid because most customers don't know it exists. There's no warning light, no obvious symptom until failure. It's easy to ignore. Tokyo taxi operators don't ignore anything. Every fluid has an interval. Every interval is followed. The differential lasts the life of the vehicle because it's never allowed to run on degraded lubricant. Tire rotation in Tokyo happens every 5,000 kilometers. That's every 3,100 miles. American guidance is typically every 5,000 to 7,500 miles. The difference seems small, but in a taxi running 80,000 miles a year, that difference determines whether you get 40,000 miles from a set of tires or 60,000. Tires wear unevenly based on weight distribution and drive axle location. Front tires on a front-wheel drive car wear faster on the outer edges because of camber and cornering forces. Rear tires wear more evenly but still develop wear patterns based on alignment and load. Regular rotation spreads that wear across all four tires so they reach end of life at the same time instead of forcing you to replace two tires early and waste half the tread life on the other two. At 3,100-mile intervals, where patterns don't have time to develop, the tires are rotated before any single position creates a permanent pattern. I measured tread depth on a Tokyo taxi at 50,000 miles. All four tires were within 1/32 of an inch of each other. I measured an American taxi at 50,000 miles that rotated every 7,500 miles. The front tires had 2/32 less tread than the rears. That doesn't sound significant until you realize the fronts will need replacement at 55,000 miles while the rears still have 15,000 miles of life left. A tire rotation in Tokyo costs about 2,000 yen, roughly $15. Over 100,000 miles at 3,100-mile intervals, that's about 32 rotations. Total cost $480, but proper rotation extends tire life by about 20%. On a set of tires that cost $600, that's $120 saved per set. Over the life of the vehicle, rotation pays for itself multiple times over. Service centers in America recommend longer rotation intervals because customers find frequent service inconvenient. It's easier to sell a 7,500-mile interval than to ask someone to come in every 3,100 miles. Tokyo taxi operators don't see it as inconvenient. The taxi goes in for oil service every 1,850 miles. Tire rotation happens at every other oil change. It's built into the service rhythm. There's no extra trip, no extra inconvenience. Cabin air filters in Tokyo taxis are replaced every 10,000 kilometers. That's every 6,200 miles. Most American recommendations are 15,000 to 20,000 miles. Some vehicles don't even mention it in the owner's manual. Tokyo treats it as critical maintenance even though it has no impact on vehicle reliability. A clogged cabin air filter restricts airflow through the HVAC system. The blower motor has to work harder to move air. That increases electrical load and reduces blower motor lifespan. More importantly, a dirty filter stops filtering. Pollen, dust, and exhaust particulates that should be trapped pass through into the cabin. For a taxi driver breathing that air 10 hours a day, indoor air quality is a health issue, not a comfort issue. I tested a cabin air filter from a Tokyo taxi at 6,200 miles. It had visible dust accumulation but airflow was still strong. I tested one from an American taxi at 35,000 miles that had never been changed. Airflow was reduced by over 40%. The filter media was packed with black particulate matter. The blower motor was drawing higher amperage to compensate for the restriction. That motor failed 3 months later at 38,000 miles. A cabin air filter costs $18. At 6,200-mile intervals over 200,000 miles, that's about 32 filters. Total cost around $576. A blower motor replacement costs $320 plus labor. More importantly, the driver isn't breathing contaminated air shift after shift. Tokyo taxi operators see this as an occupational health issue. American operators see it as optional unless the customer complains about weak airflow. You won't find this interval emphasized at service centers because cabin air filters are easy to forget and most customers won't notice the degradation until airflow is severely restricted. Tokyo doesn't wait for customer complaints. The filter is on the maintenance schedule, it gets done, air quality stays consistent, blower motors last longer. It's a small cost that prevents bigger problems. Battery terminals in Tokyo taxis are cleaned and inspected every 10,000 kilometers. That's every 6,200 miles. American taxis clean terminals only when there's a starting issue or visible corrosion. By then, the corrosion has already caused voltage drop and intermittent electrical problems. Corrosion on battery terminals creates resistance. Resistance reduces the voltage reaching the starter and the alternator's ability to charge the battery efficiently. A battery that should last 5 years might only last 3 because it's chronically undercharged. Electrical accessories start behaving erratically. You get intermittent warning lights, parasitic draw increases. These are all symptoms of terminal corrosion that could have been prevented with simple cleaning. I tested voltage drop across corroded terminals on an American taxi. At rest, battery voltage was 12.4 volts. At the starter, it was 11.6 volts. That's 0.8 volts lost to resistance. That battery was 3 years old and failing load tests. I cleaned the terminals and retested. Voltage drop disappeared. The battery passed the load test. It wasn't a bad battery, it was a bad connection. Tokyo taxi I inspected at 620,000 miles was still on its second battery. The terminals were cleaned every 6,200 miles as part of the standard inspection. There was no corrosion. Voltage drop was 0.02 volts. Negligible. That battery had been in service for 6 years and still tested at 94% capacity. Proper maintenance extended its life by at least 2 years compared to the average American taxi battery. Cleaning battery terminals costs nothing if you do it yourself. A service shop might charge $10. Over 200,000 miles at 6,200 mile intervals, that's about 32 cleanings. Total cost $320 if you pay someone every time. But it prevents premature battery replacement at $180 each and avoids the electrical gremlins that cost hundreds to diagnose. Japanese mechanics don't skip it because it's fast, cheap, and prevents problems that are expensive to fix. American service centers don't include battery terminal cleaning in standard maintenance because it doesn't generate significant revenue and customers won't pay for it as a standalone service. It only gets done when there's a problem. Tokyo builds it into every inspection. It takes 2 minutes. It costs almost nothing. It prevents failures that strand drivers and cost far more to resolve. Underbody washing in Tokyo happens every month during winter and every 2 months during summer. Most American taxis never get underbody washes unless the driver pays for it personally. Road salt, oil, grease, and grime accumulate on suspension components, subframes, and exhaust systems. That contamination traps moisture. Moisture causes rust. Rust leads to structural failure. I inspected the undercarriage of a Tokyo taxi with 710,000 miles. The frame rails were clean. Suspension components had surface rust but no structural corrosion. Exhaust hangers were intact. I compared it to an American taxi from a northern state at 180,000 miles. The subframe had rust perforation. Exhaust components were held together with aftermarket clamps because the original hangers had rusted through. Brake lines showed surface pitting. That vehicle would need significant rust repair within another year. An underbody wash in Tokyo costs about 1,500 yen, roughly $12, done monthly during the 6-month winter season and every 2 months during summer. That's 9 washes per year. Total annual cost around $108. Over 10 years, that's $1,080. Subframe replacement due to rust perforation costs over $3,000. Brake line replacement costs $800. Exhaust system corrosion repair costs $600. The washing pays for itself many times over by preventing structural deterioration. I asked Takeshi why American taxis don't do this. He didn't understand the question at first. To him, washing the undercarriage is as obvious as changing the oil. You can't see the rust forming. By the time you see it, the damage is done. Prevention is the only strategy that works. American operators see underbody washing as cosmetic. Japanese operators see it as essential to vehicle longevity. Service centers don't promote underbody washing because it requires specialized equipment and most customers won't pay for something they can't see. Tokyo taxi depots have wash bays with undercarriage spray nozzles. It's built into the service infrastructure. Every taxi gets washed on schedule. Corrosion is slowed to the point where structural components outlast the vehicle's operational lifespan. Suspension components in Tokyo taxis are inspected every 5,000 kilometers. That's every 3,100 miles. Ball joints, tie rod ends, control arm bushings, and strut mounts are visually checked and physically tested for play. American taxis inspect suspension during state safety inspections once a year when the driver reports a problem. By then, a worn ball joint has damaged the tire. A failing bushing has thrown off the alignment. A weak strut mount has created noise and vibration. Suspension wear happens gradually. A ball joint doesn't go from perfect to failed overnight. It develops play over thousands of miles, at 3,100-mile intervals. A mechanic can catch that play when it's just starting. The component can be replaced before it affects alignment or tire wear. Caught early, you replace one ball joint for $80. Caught late, you're replacing the ball joint, realigning the front end, and buying 2 new tires because the wear pattern is too severe to leave them on. I watched a Tokyo mechanic inspect ball joints on a Crown Comfort with 590,000 miles. He used a pry bar to check for vertical play in each joint. One had barely perceptible movement, not enough to fail a safety inspection, not enough to cause noise, but enough that he flagged it for replacement at the next service. 2 weeks later it was replaced. Total cost for the ball joint and installation was $75. I inspected an American taxi where the driver complained of a clunking noise. The ball joint had a 1/4 inch of play. The tire showed severe camber wear on the inside edge. The alignment was out by 2 degrees. We replaced the ball joint for $80, aligned the front end for $90, and replaced both front tires for $300. Total cost $470. If that ball joint had been caught during a 3,100-mile inspection, the cost would have been $75. Everything else could have been avoided. Dealerships don't offer 3,100-mile suspension inspections because most customers would see it as overkill. Annual inspections meet legal requirements. Anything more feels excessive. Tokyo taxi operators don't care what feels excessive. They care what prevents expensive failures. Suspension components are checked constantly. Wear is caught early. Repair costs stay low. Downtime stays minimal. Alignment checks in Tokyo happen every 20,000 kilometers. That's every 12,400 miles. Most American vehicles get aligned only when there's a tire wear problem or after suspension work. Alignment doesn't stay perfect forever. Hitting a pothole, running over a curb, or even normal suspension wear can shift alignment slightly. You won't feel it, but your tires will show it. Misalignment causes uneven tire wear. Even a half degree of toe misalignment will scrub the edge of a tire and reduce its lifespan by 20%. A single alignment check costs $70. A set of tires costs $600. Losing 20% of tire life costs you $120. The alignment check pays for itself and then some. I measured alignment on a Tokyo taxi at 12,400 miles. Toe was out by 0.15 degrees, not enough to cause noticeable pulling or vibration, but enough to start wearing the tires unevenly. The alignment was corrected, tire wear stayed even. At 50,000 miles, all 4 tires still had equal tread depth. I checked an American taxi at 50,000 miles that had never been aligned unless there was a problem. The front tires had uneven wear. One was down to 430 seconds while the other had 6. Different wear rates on the same axle, that's alignment related. Over 200,000 miles at 12,400-mile intervals, that's about 16 alignment checks. Total cost around $1,120, but proper alignment extends tire life by an average of 15%. On tires that cost $600 per set and last 50,000 miles, you're replacing them 4 times over 200,000 miles. 15% longer life saves you $360. The alignment checks cost more than the tire savings, but they also prevent suspension wear caused by components fighting misalignment forces. Service centers will align your car when you ask, but they won't recommend checking it every 12,400 miles because most customers assume alignment only changes if something breaks. Tokyo mechanics don't make that assumption. Alignment is checked on schedule. Adjustments are made before tire wear begins. It's preventive rather than reactive. Fuel filter replacement in Tokyo taxis happens every 40,000 kilometers. That's every 24,850 miles. Most modern vehicles have lifetime fuel filters that are part of the fuel pump assembly. They're never changed unless the pump fails. Tokyo operators ignore that guidance and replace inline fuel filters on the schedule regardless of what the manual says. A clogged fuel filter restricts fuel flow. The fuel pump has to work harder to maintain pressure. That increases electrical load and generates heat. Heat is the primary killer of fuel pumps. A pump that should last 200,000 miles might fail at 120,000 because it's been working against a restricted filter for years. You won't notice reduced performance until the filter is severely clogged. By then, pump damage is already occurring. I replaced a fuel filter on a Tokyo taxi at exactly 24,850 miles. I cut it open afterward. There was visible contamination inside the element, not enough to restrict flow measurably, but enough to show that the filter was doing its job and trapping particulates. Left in place for another 50,000 miles, that contamination would build to the point of restriction. I diagnosed a fuel pump failure on an American taxi at 140,000 miles. The fuel filter had never been changed. I cut it open. The element was packed with brown debris. Fuel flow was restricted enough that the pump was running continuously at high pressure trying to maintain system pressure. It overheated and failed. Pump replacement cost $850. A fuel filter costs $35. Replacing it every 24,850 miles over 140,000 miles would have cost about $200. The pump would likely still be running. You won't hear fuel filter replacement intervals from most service centers because modern vehicles don't list it as maintenance. The filter is considered part of the pump assembly. It's designed to last the life of the pump. Tokyo mechanics see it differently. The filter is a wear item. It traps contamination. Contamination builds up. The filter should be changed before buildup affects pump longevity. Japanese taxi operators treat maintenance as an investment in longevity, not an expense to minimize. They spend about $1,200 per year on preventive maintenance. American taxi operators spend about $400 per year on maintenance and $2,500 per year on repairs. Over 10 years, the Japanese approach costs $12,000 in maintenance. The American approach costs $4,000 in maintenance and $25,000 in repairs. Total cost of ownership is lower when you prevent failures than when you react to them. Tokyo taxis routinely exceed 750,000 miles. Many surpass 1,000,000. They're retired not because they're worn out but because newer models are more fuel efficient. The engines, transmissions, and differentials are still running strong. American taxis are retired around 350,000 miles because major components are failing and repair costs exceed vehicle value. Same models, different outcomes. The only variable is maintenance philosophy. The choice is straightforward. Maintain it the way Tokyo does and drive it past 500,000 miles. Or maintain it the way American fleets do and rebuild it twice before you hit 300,000. The intervals I just walked you through aren't theoretical. They're documented across millions of miles of commercial taxi operation in the most demanding urban environment in the world. Drop a comment and tell me what your current mileage is and which of these intervals you're adding to your maintenance schedule starting now. Next video breaks down why Japanese timing belt replacement intervals are half what American manuals recommend and why following the Japanese standard prevents the catastrophic engine damage I've seen in over 40 American vehicles. You won't want to miss that.